Hello hippies. This video is intended to be inspirational because many of us get total hip replacement so that we can continue doing the things we love with the people we love. And that's what this is about. This video is about a story of a 2-week trip I took hiking with my son to South America. Make sure you watch till the end where I'll reveal my favorite part of this trip. And also I'm going to include a trip I took just before my total hip replacement and another one that I took 6 months after total hip replacement. Right now, this latest trip, I'm at 2 years post-op, and people are still asking me, how my hip is doing. And I consistently tell them it's like, the hip is the first thing from my mind, but I have lots of other things going on because I'm 57 now. So there's, more aches and pains, and we kind of all continue our progression through life. But the hip performs like a champ. Doesn't even give me a second thought. So that's wonderful. And I was so happy to be able to do this trip with my son. Just for background, he just graduated from NCSU, that's North Carolina State University, with a degree in mechanical engineering, summa cum laude, so we're very proud of him. And, as a graduation gift, I offered to take him on a trip and let him decide where and when. So he chose all the details, but we planned it together, and I was just so happy to be able to do it with him. I wanted to share some great resources if you haven't already checked them out. I've made it easy by including links in this video's description. My website, hipvlog.org, contains lots of helpful resources, including an email system that will send you timely tips and information directly to your inbox throughout your hip journey. So I hope you'll take a minute now to invest in your recovery by subscribing to my YouTube channel, website, and Facebook groups. If you like my content, please share it with others and check out my other YouTube channel, Game of Life 411. Who knows, we might have some other interests in common. Thanks for watching, and now back to the video. To summarize how hiking has played in with my hip journey to date, at about 2 months before my total hip replacement, I traveled to Peru. I hiked the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu with the blessing of my surgeon.
There you go, Peter. The coca leaves are speaking.
Nice. It's long legs.
Long legs and coca leaves.
And short legs.
And that was something I learned some lessons about, so I'd suggest you watch this video if you'd like to learn more about that. A lot of it was managing pain. My surgeon said that it was okay for me to do it because he's like, well, I'm going to give you a new hip joint anyhow, so you can't really do any more harm to it. And as long as you can handle the pain and survive, then that was fine. So that was my major challenge, was managing the pain so I could get enough sleep at nights in order to function during the days. Anyhow, lots of good lessons learned there. Now, the second trip, also learned some good things there, was about 6 months post-op, and I went with the same friend, Fernando, to hike the Camino Santiago in Spain. That was 6 days, 72 miles, and it was mostly sort of a flat walking pace, whereas the trek to Machu Picchu and on the Inca Trail had a lot of elevation change. But this one on the Camino Santiago was fairly flat, so it was a good type of a hike/walk for someone recovering or recently recovered from total hip replacement. Again, suffered a major setback, learned some important lessons. I would definitely do things differently in the future, but I still think it is a great hike and a great goal to have after total hip replacement. So check out this other video for some additional information about that experience and how to avoid those setbacks while still enjoying and achieving goals like this. I've made it easy for you to find these other 2 videos by including links to them in this video's description. On this latest trip, we hiked to Machu Picchu and the Rainbow Mountains in Peru, and then we went down to Patagonia in the Chilean Antarctic and hiked around there for a couple weeks, especially in Torres del Paine National Park. Down there, it's getting toward winter, and the highs were in the 30s. We had wind gusts up to 75 miles per hour, so that was something I was a little bit apprehensive about, and that's also why I grew all the facial hair that you've probably seen in my recent videos. You can see now I'm kind of in the progress of getting rid of that in stages, but still have quite a bit left. This video is going to be related to my hip journey, but also I'm going to make it a little bit of a travel log. Cusco, Peru is at 11,000 feet elevation. And when I did my initial trip back 2.5 years ago, before my surgery, it was a very rushed deal. My friend Fernando was like, hey, you want to do this trip? We had to squeeze it in right before Thanksgiving, so I had just barely a week. We didn't have any time to acclimate to the altitude, which was a bit of a challenge. We thought, okay, let's give it a try. I figured it's a once in a lifetime experience. We just got to do this thing. So we went to Cusco. We went right into the hike the very next day, and it was okay. But there was definitely one day, the day that was sort of the most hiking, the most elevation change, where I suffered a lot. And I wasn't alone. Most of the people on the hike were suffering pretty severely that day. Mostly what that means is some sort of a fatiguey headache and just a not very nice feeling. But other than that, that hike went well. Now, for this trip, my son and I had just 2 weeks. He put the parameters on that. He wanted to limit it to 2 weeks. But we did at least plan to go a couple days early so that we could acclimate to the elevation before we do our hike. We did something called the Lares trek, which had different elevations. It was a little different than the Inca Trail trek that I did 2.5 years ago. We started our trip here in Cusco. We spent a day and a half, 2 days kind of exploring Cusco. So starting our hike, we started from Cusco, took a bus ride, and then as we started hiking, one of the high points was Condor Pass in Peru. That was an elevation of 14,400 feet or 4,400 meters. Pretty significant. I'm just going to highlight some of the high altitude spaces here. Machu Picchu was elevation almost 8,000 feet or 2,430 meters. And then Huayna Picchu is 8,800 feet and 2,693 meters. So Huayna Picchu, if you look, that little thing in the background behind me there is Machu Picchu. So Huayna Picchu is a peak that's right behind Machu Picchu. And it's another goal. When I went on this trip the first time, I did not sign up for it. It's an extra sort of excursion. And I wasn't sure that I would be able to do it after hiking the Inca Trail with my bad hip. So this time with my son and my new good hip, I thought, let's sign up for this thing and tackle it. So we did, and we tackled it, and it was challenging, but we did it, and it was awesome. So glad we did it. Totally worth it. There was Huayna Picchu. Conquered it. Totally worth it. After this trek, we booked a one-day excursion to the Rainbow Mountains, and this was by far the highest elevation that we achieved. At 17,000 feet, it's just crazy. This is roughly the same elevation as the Mount Everest base camp. So that's not the same as hiking to the peak of Mount Everest, but the base camp where everybody stages is already pretty severe and pretty high altitude. So this is the same elevation. And I got to tell you, you really feel it because the oxygen is 50% less dense at this level. So you're struggling for every breath. And it wasn't just on this day, but of course, at 17,000 feet, you have it the most pronounced. On all those high elevation days, a lot of times you're going up a pretty steep incline and you're not, moving very fast. It is really a slow, plodding climb. And there were some things that really surprised me about having that low oxygen content. So for example, even just taking a sip of water would leave me breathless, trying to suck on a candy, trying to talk to someone. So these are all things that, like normally when you're exerting yourself, you can kind of do those things in addition to it or take a small break and do those. But when you are always struggling to get enough oxygen into your body, then you can't take these breaks, right? You have to keep breathing. And it was just very interesting. I didn't expect that quite. So at any rate, continuing on our trip, here's all the gear I packed for the trip. This is the first trip at age 57 that I ever paid for either business or first class. And it was only on the segment going to our destination, not on the return. The reason was because normally when I've looked at first class tickets, they're like triple the cost of a normal ticket, and I just can't bring myself to spend that money, even though I could afford it, technically speaking. But in this case, the outbound journey, it was more expensive, but it wasn't triple. It was maybe, 50% or double, somewhere around that. And it was business class, and then something they call premium economy. And I'm so glad I did it. It was totally worth it. Now, on the return trip, again, the price was crazy, so we just traveled back normal economy. When we got to the airport at Lima, I was surprised by this Dunkin' Donuts display. This is the most massive Dunkin' Donuts display I think I've ever seen, and I even used to work for Dunkin' Donuts. I guess you could say Peru runs on Dunkin'. We are a cat family, not a dog family. So if you look at our family chat, you'll see lots of pictures of our cats. So this is for my daughter. She also is my producer, helping me produce these videos. And anytime you see a cat inserted into this video, it's for her. It turns out my son is quite the foodie, so while we were in Cusco, he wanted to try some nice restaurants, and we found some really great ones. So this is a Chinese restaurant, and in Peru, they call those chifas. Chifa is a term for a Chinese restaurant, typically sort of a Chinese-Peruvian fusion type setup. At any rate, we found this cool chifa in Cusco and really enjoyed the food that we had there. Those dark-looking buns there are made with squid ink. Since this was the first time I spent any time in Cusco, I was surprised that they had so many sites of their own. I thought it was just sort of a starting point for hikes to Machu Picchu, but in fact, Cusco used to be the capital of the Incan Empire, and so it was their most important city. And as a result, they have some ruins right nearby. They have the giant palace of the sun god and things like that. So this is Sacsayhuaman. Yeah, that's the name. I was kind of challenged with that name, so I used to jokingly call it Sasquatch Land as I was talking to Jordy. Anyhow, just for fun. But you can see the massive ruins here, and the scale is just astounding. When you think about back in 1500s, them moving stones of this size, it's phenomenal. On our way out of Sacsayhuaman, we were hit by a hailstorm. I couldn't believe it. Luckily, there was a cool little restaurant right there with an amazing view. So we stopped, and I had this beer, which is brewed with coca leaves, which, everything in Peru is brewed with coca leaves. They give you coca tea. It's supposedly an altitude sickness cure, and they have coca candies everywhere, and people are walking around chewing on coca leaves, kind of like we would chew on tobacco leaves in the United States. And it's just sort of a national thing. I don't know if you call it a pastime, but everybody seems to have coca leaves and do stuff with coca leaves. So I had this beer. It was quite tasty. I didn't notice any weird effects, no cocaine beer type effect, but it was a tasty beer. And this is the view from that restaurant, which is pretty amazing. Now, somehow my son spied way, way, way far away some cats on a roof. We arrived this morning in Cusco, Peru, after about 17 or 18 hours of travel, and just really kind of relaxing today, looking around the town, and did a little bit of exploring, just trying to acclimate to the elevation. Cusco is at 11,000 feet of elevation, so you definitely feel it. Lightheaded, breathing hard, heart beating on any kind of inclines. So hopefully that will prepare us for our hike to Machu Picchu in a couple days. Jordy, if you were to summarize our first day in one word, what would it be?
Unplanned.
Okay, that's fair. Good first day, and looking forward to the rest of the trip. We noticed the phase of the moon, and of course the other thing down here is that everything is opposite. We're in the southern hemisphere. There's the fanciest KFC you've ever seen. And we found a great pizza place. And my son likes to try margarita pizzas. It's sort of a basic pizza. And that's his way of judging how good a pizza place is. Well, we found an amazing one. Now, I also ordered a coffee. And you see, you got the sugar container there. And right next to it, they gave me this little container with some white, creamy looking stuff in it. So I thought, that must be milk or cream or something for my coffee. So I put it in my coffee, only to discover it was a garlic sauce. So thankfully, the lady was willing to bring me another coffee. I thought this was hilarious. The electrical wiring in the city of Cusco, just sort of chaos, and third world. They don't have quite the same standards that we do. And in Cusco, they had all these really cool wrought iron fixtures. So whether it be your traffic lights or rest stops or bus stops, everything was done with this really cool cast iron. We stayed in a hotel called the Palacio del Inca, which, as I learned later, is actually built on some Incan foundations. So there were some Incan ruins that the foundations remained, and they built this hotel on top of that. So very solid foundations. And the buffet they had at this hotel had this entire honeycomb on display, and you could then get honey to put on your bread. It was so amazing. This is the Palace of the Sun God in Cusco, Peru. And this is looking at it out the front door of our hotel, the Palacio del Inca. I just thought it was kind of cool. We didn't even realize what this building was initially. We were staying in the hotel, and I was asking my friend Fernando, who's Peruvian, for suggestions on things to do while we were there. And he said, you should go check this out. Actually, technically, this is a colonial monastery that was built on top of the Palace of the Sun God. If you look to the right, you can see some of the ruins from the original palace, but all this other stuff is really more from the colonial era. Here you can see the back of the palace grounds and some pretty cool carvings in the lawn down there and some of the original walls. And then this is sort of a sample, a representative gold tablet. Because this was the temple of the sun god, it was the richest temple in the Incan Empire. And evidently there was one room dedicated to the sun god that was completely covered in gold tablets, gold plates, gold leaf. And of course, all that had been stolen and melted down by the conquistadors. But originally, I'm sure it was quite impressive. This is the white Jesus overlooking Cusco. See any resemblance? A nice vista of Cusco. And again, using my Samsung S25 Ultra to zoom in on the main square here in Cusco. Pretty amazing how this camera works. It's 4 a.m. and we're about to get picked up for the Lares trek. And yesterday was our second day here in Cusco. We got up early because my son Jordy wanted us to be on an early rise, early to bed schedule, which will kind of fit in with some of the activities and things that we have to do during this trip, like today, for example. So we got up at 5 a.m. yesterday, and I think we got back to the hotel around noon, and he said, yeah, it's noon, and we've already been walking for about 5 hours today. So a lot of activity, still feeling the effects of elevation, but I think maybe feeling a little bit less. At the end of the day yesterday, though, my left foot, the arch, was hurting a lot. I don't know if I stepped on something the wrong way or what happened. It didn't really hurt during our walking, but afterwards. So knock on wood, that is okay, because today we have, I think, 6 miles of pretty serious hiking on the first day of our trek. The other thing we found out yesterday was, as we did our final packing, I forgot my hiking pants. I couldn't believe it. I put the legs back on them, they're convertible pants, and I guess I hugged them right back up into my closet at home. So Jordy, bless his heart, went out and bought another pair of hiking pants for me. He was luckily able to find something that would fit me and basically similar to what I had. So thank goodness. The other thing that was kind of funny was we were looking over the itinerary, and one of the first things we do today is visit some hot springs. And we were both like, did you bring a bathing suit? No, I didn't bring a bathing suit. So he spent about an hour looking around. This is not an area, I don't think, where there's a lot of swimming. So there were not a lot of places that sold swimsuits. But he found them, and they weren't too expensive, so that's good because it's probably going to be one-time use sort of a thing. We went out last night and had dinner on my friend Fernando. He wanted to do something nice for Jordy to congratulate him on graduating from college. And that was just super nice of him. He's also very thrilled that we're here in Peru, which is his native country. Looking forward to getting started on our hike. Jordy told me yesterday he was getting excited. We'll see how everything goes. Wish us luck. Okay, so starting out on the Lares trek, our first stop was these hot springs, and it was just so cool. So on this Lares trek, there is a guide, there is a chef, there are some porters, and this is some lunch that they prepared us. This guacamole was absolutely amazing. Some of the best guacamole I think I've ever had. And here are some of the other local foods. You can see that there's a lot of potatoes and everything. This is the hot springs again. And this is something right outside the hot springs. So you can see that this is sort of an active area. These are some of the horses that were carrying our gear on the trek. And right at the beginning of our trek, we had a rainstorm. And I think I sprained my hand trying to get the poncho out of my bag because I didn't think ahead, and it was shoved way down in the bottom. So, of course, it's raining and I'm panicking trying to pull it out. Anyhow, that bothered me for the next few days, but at least we got out of the rain. We're at the end of our first day of hiking, and we stopped at an absolutely gorgeous location. It's on this lake, which I'll show you here in a second. And things went very well. They say we hiked about 6 miles. And I'm not sure it was quite that far, but it really was amazing and not too bad. Now, along the way, we had very cold rain. It was, I don't know, low 50s in terms of temperature. And that was rough. My hands were numb, even wearing waterproof gloves and a poncho and things like that. But I survived, and, you know, with the physical activity, of course, you warm up, and that was pretty good. So, yeah, day one, pretty good. My hip is doing great. As I've said before, the hip is really not a worry for me. My opposite side lower back pain is a bit of a concern. I have disc degenerative disease, which, you know, is a tricky thing. So I had a procedure done about 10 days ago, and that hopefully will bring me some relief long term. I had the same procedure done 6 months ago. And it seemed to help, probably gave me about 70% relief. So that was about as far as I wanted to go. I didn't want to go to more extreme measures like some sort of actual surgery on my spine. I'll take some pain meds before bed. I might take a muscle relaxant. We'll see. Just depends on how I'm feeling. My most important thing, as always, is to manage the pain so that I can get enough sleep to function during the day. I can kind of handle the pain during the day most of the time until it gets really bad. At any rate, really looking forward to dinner. You probably saw the video of them harvesting the potatoes. Well, our guide bought a bunch of potatoes. That's actually an Andean thing. The Incas, were very big into potato
agriculture, and they developed all kinds of different potatoes that grew at different altitudes, and it's really a staple for them. So he bought a bunch of these local potatoes, and we'll be having those for dinners and lunches and stuff for the next few days. Anyhow, great day one here on our hike, and looking forward to day two. Day two is supposed to be a lot rougher, so we'll see. I think one of the guys looked it up on his mapping app, and it's supposed to be like 6.5 hours of hiking. It's a lot of elevation change up and then a lot of elevation change down. So wish me luck. Rough first night camping. I don't know. I didn't get much sleep. Anyhow, hopefully today will go well. It's our most aggressive hiking day, and I'm tired starting out, but so far no serious physical ailments. Things are holding together.
These are a couple of Andean geese, and this is our first campsite. These chinchillas were infesting the hillsides, and it's like I looked up and saw something out of the corner of my eye, and there's a chinchilla zipping across. Look at these absolutely gorgeous views. Now, it was interesting. You've got all these mountain lakes, and it turns out that they're doing aquaculture and raising trout in a lot of these lakes. So another sort of agricultural industry that the locals have adopted. Llamas and alpacas are everywhere. You can tell we're hiking at high elevation. There's permanent snow cover on some of these mountaintops.
Okay, just taking a breather here. We are just about to Condor Pass, and just gorgeous up here. The vistas are amazing. Breathtaking. Oh yeah, look up there at that. Just amazing. So well worth the trek. Guess one was late. It's a freaking hailstorm.
This is one of our campsites, and we had another hailstorm. I couldn't believe it. It's the second hailstorm of the trip. And as part of this stop, we got invited into a local's home. And it's not the sort of thing I typically get excited about. But our guide took us to the home of one of the horsemen, the guy who was handling the pack animals for our trek. And we got to see how he and his family lived. So a family of 5 lived in this small house, single room house. You can see how things are set up. You've got these little fires and things like that. This cat we named Asher because he's covered with soot and ash. And if you look down, you can see the little cubby hole in the middle there. I asked him what that was for. He said, oh, that's actually for the guinea pigs. He said, when there's a new litter of babies, they'll actually go in there because with the fires on either side, it's a little bit warmer than usual for them. And here you can see some of the guinea pigs. I mean, they're basically just living underneath the beds and wherever they could. Our horseman also had a herd of llamas, and so we got to meet those up close and personal. When we got to this campsite in the afternoon, it was after our most arduous day of hiking. Lots of elevation, lots of hiking, sort of treacherous. I actually fell one time, although luckily I fell onto a piece of poncho that was in my pocket, so it was a very soft fall. But my son and I got there, our tents had been set up. We just kind of went inside and unpacked our gear and then just laid down to relax because it was early in the afternoon, but we were already pretty exhausted. And so we're laying there, and all of a sudden this dog runs in, and we're like, hey, what the heck? Get out of here. And then turn around 2 seconds later, he had rushed back in. So we had to close the tent in order to keep him out. And for the rest of our time there, this dog just kind of hung around with us. That's our tent you can see in the picture. And, we don't know why he loved that spot. He just always had to be sitting outside that tent. And when he wasn't doing that, he'd come into the dining tent to mooch. So here you can see he was sitting right behind my chair in the dining tent. This is a kind of a cool picture of the dining tent. So you can see the table is where we're all sitting to eat. And then there's sort of a partition. And then on the other side, you've got some of the porters, the chef, and they're preparing our meals over there. So it's all being done in this one same tent. And when we need additional food or supplies, they can hand it over the little partition there. Normally on their larger treks, that partition goes all the way up to the ceiling. But this was a pretty small and informal trek. We, in fact, only had 5 people on the trek. And it was all guys. So there were plenty of jokes about, hey, it's an all-dude trek. So, plenty of, rude behavior. It was going to be acceptable. But it was a good time. It was myself, my son. There was an Indian gentleman who had just graduated from college. And then there were two guys from Canada, one of whom lived in Mexico and one who lived in Panama. We really enjoyed having a small trekking group. It really makes it more intimate. You get to know people, you get to know the guides better, and it's just more enjoyable. The cooks on these hikes are very creative because, as you see, I mean, they're sitting on the floor, cooking on the floor with little, burners and things like that. Yet they can get very creative, and the dishes they create are pretty amazing, quite tasty. And then they do stuff like this. So they created this cake, they baked it with all the stuff that they brought, and then they somehow put the baked cake inside of a Jell-O mold. I don't know exactly how they accomplished that, but it's still pretty impressive. And it was a pretty good cake, I have to say. This was one of my favorite sections of the trek, just seeing all these cool animals right alongside this picturesque little stream. We encountered this unique looking llama. I call this sort of a brindle pattern after the patterns in dog breeding. But anyhow, he's pretty cool, and we didn't see any other llamas that looked at all like this. So there's our little canine companion again. We gave him the nickname Dennis after Dennis the Menace because he was a weird little dog, kind of crazy and just always getting into trouble. So not only did he try and sneak into our tent and join us in the dining tent, but when we went on our excursions during the day there, he would come along and he would just like run and chase and bark at waves. And then he would find a water bottle, an empty water bottle, and start crunching on it and running around with it and just chasing his own tail around in circles. He was crazy. And then later when we're hiking, he'd be munching on people's pant legs and things like that. So anyhow, crazy dog, super cute, enjoyed having his company for that day. At one point, I was walking down a pretty narrow path, and it was kind of going steeply downhill, a lot of loose gravel. And I looked to my side, and there was a horse's head right here. And then all of a sudden, I got shoved forward. It was one of the horses wearing a big pack, and he, I guess, didn't realize where the pack was relative to his own body. And so he just launched me forward. So I'm flying downhill, loose gravel, heavy backpack, trying to catch my feet, and I thought I was done for. I was just like falling. But luckily I was able to right myself and avoid any kind of a serious accident, and it scared the heck out of me. So the horses were a godsend though. I mean, they really helped us carry so much gear. We ran into this lady herding her sheep. That was kind of fun. This was at the last stop of our Lares trek, and I thought this was just genius. I mean, first off, I thought this is a kind of a cool picture with whatever that is, a water buffalo or something, I'm not quite sure. But the thing I really focused on was that mound in the center there. So being a gardener myself, I was like, wait a minute, this is genius. So they had a little field, right? And there was a massive boulder in the center of the field. So they're like, well, that's wasted space. But no, what they did is they built a perimeter of boulders on the top of this thing, put in some soil, and then grew some crawling vines like cucumbers or squash or pumpkin. So I just thought that was amazing and genius, and they're efficiently using all the space that they had. And there's Dennis just dead to the world after our long hike. So we met up with a different group who was on a different hike on the next day when we went to the Rainbow Mountains. And it turns out that Dennis also encountered their group. So I guess what he does is like every day he makes this particular journey, follows with this hiking group, and then goes back to the beginning and starts again. So a lot of hiking for this dog, but it must be working for him. He's getting fed well enough. Some more of the delicious food that they served us on our hike. That is a lomo saltado, which is sort of a grilled meat platter with some potatoes. And then the other one is called a causa, which is like mashed potatoes with tuna or something else inside. You can see here Dennis is strategically located by the cooking shack where he hopes to get some scraps, and he did. Here we are visiting what they call a salt mine. This is the second largest salt mine in South America, and it's pretty cool. They've got over 5,000 of these little salt flats here. Evidently, there's a village that controls this, and every family has their own little salt flat. And there is one little river that is allowing salt water to come in, and then they have all these little channels that channel it down into these different things. Then they let it evaporate and harvest the salt, and that's their major source of income here. Now, they've also turned this into a big tourist attraction, so I'm not sure whether they get more money from the tourism or from the salt sales themselves, but still a pretty impressive operation. Later on, we stopped at a bar, a local chicheria.
Hi, how? Let's go now!
And chicha is corn beer. So here you can see as we went in, we're playing a game called Zappo, which is frog, and then when we went inside, you could see that they had the requisite guinea pigs, and it was kind of cute. They had this whole little guinea pig farmstead house thing set up for them. Anyhow, pretty cute. And while we were there, we also learned all the steps to brew chicha beer. One of the valleys that we camped in is called Cancha Cancha, which stands for walls. And what we learned is that the same small number of families, I think it was 35 families, subsistence farmed in this area for hundreds of years. So we kind of joked that, hey, maybe the 5 of us, if we, Armageddon happens or whatever, we get trapped here in Peru, then we'll have to become the 36th family. And how do we survive? One of our solutions was we're going to brew chicha beer. So the guys had to learn how to do that. And of course, it was the Canadians who were most interested. So here you can see we're learning how to grind the corn. Then you can learn how to boil the corn. This is how you ferment the corn mash. I thought it was interesting. The guinea pigs kept coming over and drinking what looks like corn mash, liquid that was seeping out of the corn mash. So I'm imagining they're pretty happy guinea pigs. And here we are cheering. So this is chicha beer. It's pink because they mixed some strawberry juice in with it. But it's a corn beer, and it was pretty tasty. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Here we are at Machu Picchu. Now, when we first arrived, it was totally overcast like this. But our guide was pretty wise. He gave us some background and talked to us for a while we were at the very first stop. And that was enough time for the clouds to sort of clear. I mean, it cleared and they came back and then they cleared some more. But eventually we got some really nice views of Machu Picchu. Here you can see I'm pointing to Huayna Picchu, which is the peak behind Machu Picchu. And I wanted to hike up to the top of that this time. I did not do it last time. Okay, so here I'm going to have to get up on my soapbox a little bit. So one of the things that you learn when you're going on tours like this is that the information you get is not always 100% accurate, right? So we had a guide. Our guide told us various things, supposed facts from history. And then we met up with a different guide later in the trip who told us different facts about the same things that we saw and that this guide told us were for certain things. So you learn to take things with a grain of salt. In this case, he was saying that, this part of the temple was starting to collapse because of global warming, because of all the rains, and they were not able to do anything to rectify it. Simultaneously, he's telling us that the problem is that they clear-cut all the vegetation that was covering and protecting Machu Picchu when they discovered it, and that they have not been allowed to maintain the drainage in all of the many tiers leading up to Machu Picchu. So when the Incas built it, a lot of these different terraces were 20 or 30 feet deep. They would dig down to the bedrock and then fill these things up, but with a drainage system incorporated into that. Of course, over time, those drainage systems have come into disrepair. They may not be functioning correctly. So you're starting to see some settling like you do here. So it's a little bit of a weird situation. They'd like to, on one hand, blame everything on global warming. But on the other hand, they have a group, UNESCO, who has called this a World Heritage Site. And basically what they've said is, okay, this is a World Heritage Site. It is what it is at this point in time. It is ruins. You may not maintain it any further, which really means that it's going to continue to decay until it basically disappears from the face of the earth. Because the Incas didn't mean for it to decay, right? I mean, when the Incas built it, they maintained it. They maintained the drainage system in all of the terraces. The other thing we asked them about is, there were a bunch of stone walls making up the various structures, and they had mortar in between. I was like, well, what's that mortar? Like, oh, it's clay. It's like, clay. Well, why doesn't it just wash out and things just fall apart? And they're like, well, the Incas, they would put a layer of plaster over that whole wall to protect it. And every 3 or 4 years, they'd apply a new layer of plaster, so it was always protected. Well, now it's exposed to the elements, so it is washing away and falling apart and decaying. So no big surprise there. So I personally am a little bit perplexed on this whole concept of UNESCO, because it seems like, either it's a natural site and you want to preserve its nature and just leave it alone, or it's a man-made site, in which case you should be able to maintain it. So I don't know why they have this thing where you're like, oh, you are a ruin. We're going to let you continue to decay so that future generations cannot enjoy you. Anyhow, I don't know. Weird. I'll get off my soapbox now and you can draw your own conclusions. This is me walking up to Huayna Picchu. It was not all nice stairs like this, but it was very steep most of the way. Here I am on the top of Huayna Picchu looking down on Machu Picchu. As we were heading back down from Huayna Picchu, you have to go through a cave. And there have to be lots of people who can't make it through this cave because it was very narrow, and you get in there and you have to go like at like a 35 or a 45 degree angle. And basically I was like laying on the side on the wall of the cave while my feet were kind of like this, and I was trying to walk through like that and hold on to it like this. And then you have to duck way down because Incans were not as tall as I am. So anyhow, I can imagine there are a lot of people that hiked up there that struggled with that cave, but that was just kind of fun and interesting. And here I am coming down some steps on Huayna Picchu. In a lot of ways, Peru is still pretty undeveloped once you get outside the large cities. So when we were going to the Rainbow Mountains, the road we took was probably 3 hours from Cusco. But you went through a lot of rural areas, and there were a lot of rock slides like this one here, which is almost blocking the entire road. And then there are also the dirt roads. Here's another unique llama. This is the Rastafarian llama. See his dreadlocks? And this is something the locals call the Lama Sutra. They get a big kick out of this. These locals are all waiting here to help carry tourists up to the top of the Rainbow Mountains, folks who are not able to do the climb themselves, considering the 17,000-foot elevation. And here's one of those tourists. Here we're just approaching the Rainbow Mountains. As I was researching this trip and I saw pictures of the Rainbow Mountains online, I thought, these have to be photoshopped. There's no way that's how it's going to look in reality. I have to say, once I got there in person, it looks just as amazing in person as it did in the photos. Just look at these amazing views. Another interesting thing about the Rainbow Mountains is that it was only discovered about 9 years ago. Prior to that, it was permanently covered with snow. Here's a silly little travel tip. When we were staying at the Palacio del Inca Hotel, we needed to get our laundry done. And so you could get it done in the hotel. They charged by the piece. Or there were all kinds of places around town that said laundry and in as little as 2 hours. So we decided to use one of these establishments, and they had charged by the kilo. So we were able to get all these items done for the same price it would have cost us to do these 6 items through the hotel. On our way from Peru to Chile, we found this local burger chain, and it was amazing. These are some of the biggest burgers, and they were delicious. I had the Juan, as you can see there in the display, but seriously, after eating these things, we were both absolutely stuffed. Literally, I could barely get my mouth open wide enough in order to take a bite. From the plane, we saw this observatory in the Atacama Desert.
Here we are in Chilean Antarctica on the Strait of Magellan. This is a seriously desolate part of the world. It reminds me a little bit of Alaska because everything is very utilitarian. It was also cool as we were picking up our car, which is an MG, a brand we don't really get in the United States anymore. The guy was going over all the safety precautions, made sure that we had chains for the tires just in case, even though this is not yet the coldest, snowiest part of the winter. And we had a spare tire, and gave us all kinds of cautions about the winds. He said, watch the doors when you open the doors because the winds are so strong, they'll damage the doors. Anyhow, super cool, excited to be here at pretty much the southernmost tip of the world. After spending the night in Punta Arenas, we headed north toward Torres del Paine. And on the way, we passed these rhea. These are flightless birds, kind of similar to an ostrich. And I guess the ranchers are trying to propagate them to reintroduce them and repopulate them in the wild. You can see this area of Patagonia is pretty desolate. There's a lot of ranching, but really not much else. On our 5-hour drive to Torres del Paine, we were told to make sure to refuel in Puerto Natales because there are no gas stations inside the park. So this is about an hour and a half or so, maybe 2 hours from Torres del Paine. And we ran into this herd of cattle being herded by some cowboys as we were stopping to get gas. And this is the view opposite the gas station. This sign tells us that the pavement is about to end. Here we are just entering the Torres del Paine National Park. You can see the beautiful fall colors because this is either late fall or early winter, depending on how you consider it. It was also interesting, we saw wild horses and wild cattle throughout the park. And when I say wild, I mean they were obviously domestic breeds. They didn't look any different than something you'd see in a farm. Why is there a horse on this road just wandering around? Hello, horse. And so I asked someone about them, and it was explained to me that they had escaped maybe 100 or 200 years ago and had just been reproducing in the wild here ever since. So I was a little perplexed by that because they did sort of make a big deal about protecting the natural environment. And I thought, cows and horses are not native to this area, and they must be affecting the ecosystem. I would think they would take steps to round up those cattle and those horses and remove them from the park. Anyhow, it's just one of those sort of odd things I wonder about.
Dear viewer, I wanted to give you a brief update on our trip. We made it to Chile and to the Torres del Paine National Park. It was about a 5-hour drive from Punta Arenas near the Strait of Magellan. And the weather was okay during our drive. It was cold, it was a little bit windy. The guy who rented us the rental car said, be careful of wind when you open the door to the car. Hang on to it because the wind will damage the doors. Well, we didn't have a lot of wind on our trip, but spending our first night about the middle of the night, boy, did it kick up. And when we awoke this morning, we looked at the forecast and it was 31 miles per hour winds. So crazy towns.
The gusts of wind are crazy. They're almost pushing me over.
It's not sunrise yet. Sunrise, interestingly enough, when you're this far south, is 9:30 a.m., which I just think is crazy.
It's interesting down here, it's 1 p.m., and that's pretty much the highest the sun is going to get. So just one of those quirks of being almost, down in Antarctica. Just thought it was interesting and wanted to capture this.
Anyhow, I don't know what we're going to do this week. I've done a screenshot of the weather forecast, and it does not look good at all. It's like highs in the 30s, wintry mix, very windy. So thankfully, we're staying in a pretty nice hotel, the Hotel Lago Grey. Wish us luck, and I will report back as things evolve. As I sit here making this video, I'm kind of backed up against the window, and I can feel the wind pushing against my chair. So it's nothing to be messed with. Stay tuned.
The food at Hotel Lago Grey was a pleasant surprise. I wouldn't necessarily say it was 5-star, but probably 4-star. And the waitstaff was very friendly. We got to know them pretty well during the time we were there. This is a stuffed trout dish. This is leg of lamb. And this is the teeniest, tiniest little eclair that I've ever seen. They had this with the breakfast buffet one day. It's a new day in Torres del Paine. What a difference a day makes. Still cold, but otherwise just a gorgeous day. And so Jordy and I are getting ready to go hiking and take advantage of it. We enjoyed beautiful views on several hikes throughout our stay at Torres del Paine National Park. I've done a lot of hiking in my life, and I have to say the hiking in this park was pretty challenging. They had trails that required a guide, and they had trails that required using walking sticks and crampons, which are spikes that you attach to the bottom of your hiking boots. And I've never used crampons before in my life. But I have to say, now having gone through and done some hikes here, I can see why they say it. As you can see, some of these trails like this one are pretty precarious. I mean, this was a very steep slope that I was walking along, and it was icy and snowy, and having some crampons would have helped a lot. I'm glad I had the walking sticks. At least that made it somewhat safe. But I was kind of nervous. So I think it would be better to follow their advice and actually use those things if you have them. Another just phenomenal view. One of the things you can do in Torres del Paine is track pumas, and they have excursions where you go puma tracking and sighting. And we were thinking about doing that. We ended up deciding not to do it because it's more of a car-based type of a thing. You drive around looking for the pumas, and maybe there's a little bit of walking. And we were really there to do a lot of hiking. That's what my son wanted to do. However, on this particular morning, we did see these cat prints as we started our hike, and we're like, oh my goodness. We wonder if there was a puma around here somewhere. Well, it turns out there's a different kind of cat that lives in Torres del Paine. It's called Joffrey's cat, and it's about the size of a house cat, so not nearly as threatening as a puma would be. Puma, by the way, is the same as cougar or mountain lion. So those are, pretty substantial beasts. But Joffrey's cat is a cute little thing about the size of a house cat. And since they're mostly nocturnal, we didn't even see one. We just saw his little paw prints here. This is a piece of ultra clear ice from the glacier. The reason it's so clear is because the high pressure forces all the air bubbles out of it. And we also stumbled upon these parakeets, which I usually associate with jungles, but they live down here in this very cold climate. And here you can see why they call this Lago Grey, because the water's all gray, and that's from the silt from the glaciers. Because of all the silt, this lake is actually devoid of life. Okay, this is what I kind of expected down here in Patagonia, because May is the beginning of their winter. And so I guess we got lucky and had some nicer weather the last couple days. It's also interesting because some of the hotels here have closed. There are only a couple in the park. And this hotel is at like 1/3 capacity. I asked at the lobby yesterday, and they said, yeah, normally we can have about 120 guests, but we only have 40. However, today's Saturday, and it's the Glacier Sailing Day. And so there are just tons of people here that I guess are just weekend tourists. And so that's been interesting. They, during the peak season, have 3 cruises a day, 2 days per week. But at this time of year, they only have 1 cruise 1 time per week on Saturday. So I guess it's for the weekend tourist. And I'm surprised it's packed, but I guess I shouldn't be. So anyhow, it'll be an interesting day. It's absolutely gorgeous. I was a little hesitant about this whole trip just because I am not a winter person. I don't ever travel in the winter for holidays. So this has been an interesting trip, and I guess I'm glad to see snow since that's kind of what I expected. So anyhow, great day. Looking forward to the Glacier Gray cruise. And there's our ship way over there. We have to walk there, by the way, after taking our car to a parking area. But it's about a 40-minute walk, so fun, fun, fun.
This support craft named Fritz caught my eye because that was one of the nicknames my late father went by, Fritz. My dad's name was, well, he was Catholic, so on his birth certificate it was Johannes George Winifred Ziertz. And that's quite a mouthful. So he always went by Hans-Jürgen Ziertz, which for Americans is pretty tough to pronounce. So sometimes people just call him Fritz because he's German. The glacier cruise was a lot of fun. I really love looking at glaciers. I think that the blue color they have due to the thousands of years and thousands or millions of tons of pressure, I just think that's gorgeous and I enjoy looking at it. So we had a good time on the cruise and they served Pepsi in these teeny tiny cans. I always give a thumbs up to any establishment serving Pepsi products. These glaciers are part of the Chilean continental ice shelf, which has been melting. And if you're doing all the normal touristy stuff, the tour guides and whatnot will always mention that this is due to man-made global warming. But the reality is that that ice shelf has been melting for over 17,000 years. As they say, the only constant in life is change. On another hike, we hiked out to get a great view of what are known as the Horns, the Cuernos. Not sure who would be swimming in this lake, but I guess it's possible.
Oh man, no fun at all.
For our drive back to Punta Arenas to catch our flight to the United States, we actually had to leave while it was still dark. It was like 6 a.m. So we had to drive through the park on the gravel road with all the potholes and everything in complete darkness. There were lots of wildlife hanging around and we were trying to make sure that we were safe and not hit any of them. But then around 9 or so, we were rewarded with this absolutely fabulous sunrise. And I'm used to sunrises being at their peak for just a few minutes. So I thought I'd miss the opportunity to take a picture of it. But then 10 minutes later, I'm looking around. It's like, wow, it's still a gorgeous sunrise. And I guess that's because, again, we're so far south. So I was able to capture this picture. And then if you look the opposite direction, it was actually reflecting on the clouds on the opposite side of the sky. Here's another cat for my daughter. I get a kick out of some of the vehicles and vehicle names that you have in other countries. This is obviously a Chinese make, the Great Wall. And it's a Wingle 7. And this is what our car looked like at the end of our trip. This is a collection of all the sharp and pointy objects they collect at the security checkpoints at the airport. Have you ever heard of altitude training for performance? It's a thing. It's sometimes called high altitude training or hypoxic training. And basically the principle is this. So you go to a higher altitude, which has a lower concentration of oxygen. Your body is miraculous, right? It is constantly adapting to conditions. So when you're in a low oxygen environment, your body is going to create more red blood cells, which is going to increase your athletic performance if you go to a lower altitude. So it's a very cool concept, and I wanted to see, if it actually worked. So, we had spent a considerable amount of time at high altitude when we were in Peru, not in Chile. So when we got back to the US, I wanted to do another hike, one that we had done many times before, and just see if there was any change in our performance. And as you can see here, there definitely was.
Just finished the Company Mill Trail 6-mile hike in PBR, personal best record. My son and I wanted to try to test the whole theory of improved blood capacity based on altitude training. So we just got back from our trip to South America, and we were at elevation about 8 days ago. So the last 8 days we have not been at high elevations, but we still kicked it. So 1 hour, 33 minutes instead of our previous personal best, which was 1 hour, 50 minutes. That is a significant improvement. Pretty cool.
After this hike, Jordy and I compared notes, and we both agreed that we could not have gone faster without changing our gait. So in other words, as a hike, this was literally as fast as we could have gone without it being extremely dangerous or without us breaking into a jog or a run. So that was very cool. And the other thing that was amazing is, when I do this hike, it takes me 2 hours and I'm pretty tired, at the end, and my muscles are tired for the rest of that day and things like that. After this hike, I was not winded. My muscles were not sore. I felt like I could keep going. It was amazing. So anyhow, if you ever want to give it a try or have the opportunity, altitude training is pretty cool. So what was my favorite part of this trip? It was just getting to do it with my son Jordy. So now you can all collectively say, "Aw." That's sort of the typical response. But in all seriousness, being able to do something like this with my son is absolutely the best part of it. And it's part of the reason why I stay fit. It's part of the reason why I got my total hip replacement, so that I can continue doing the things that I love with the people that I love. And as I age, it's becoming more and more important, the people that I'm doing it with, than the actual thing that I'm doing. Now, beyond that, you might wonder what aspects of this trip I liked better than others. So I can say now, after having been to Peru twice, that I preferred Peru over Chile. I just really like Peru. It's a gorgeous country. The people are very nice. It's got a great cultural heritage. I didn't experience a lot of bugs. A lot of the trekking lists say bring insect repellent. I don't think I ever used it one time in either place. Patagonian Chile, also known as the Chilean Antarctic, has a desolate beauty to it. I mean, there are some fabulous vistas and panoramas, but it's a different kind of beauty. It's more like, going to the desert or something like that. And not that it is desert, but it's that sort of desolate beauty. And so for that reason and many others, I like Peru better. So if I were doing a trip like this again, I would definitely go at a different time of year. May is not the right time to go to Patagonia or to the Chilean Antarctic. The other thing I would do differently is I would either spend the full 2 weeks in Peru or in Chile, because travel time is significant down there. Our trip from Chile back to Raleigh was 30 hours, right? Total travel time was like 30 hours. That's just crazy, and it's a significant chunk of the trip. So in addition to that, you had the long flight down to Peru and then the long flight from Peru down to Chile. So it was just a lot of travel in a 2-week period. And I think it would have been better to spend that time in one location or the other, enjoying some additional sites that we weren't able to fit in. If we had more time in Chile, there are other things we could have done. We could have visited the penguin colony. We could have visited the flamingo sanctuaries. There's an archaeological park with a Mylodon cave. That's a giant sloth. And I think we would have enjoyed those things as well. Similarly, up in Peru, there were things we couldn't do. Jordy wanted to go to the Atacama Desert, among other things, and we just weren't able to fit it in. So with only 2 weeks to work with, I think it would have been better to spend that time in either one country or the other. Thanks for watching. If you're a hippie, please let me know what sort of bucket list adventures or goals you have for after your total hip replacement. And if you like my content, let me know by using some of YouTube's cool features, super chats, super thanks, or become a channel member for more exclusive content and a more personal connection.
It's your world and I'm just a squirrel trying to get a nut to move your butt.
Explore all the free resources and helpful information throughout your hip journey by joining the Pete's Hip Vlog community and subscribing to my YouTube channel, Pete's Hip Vlog. If you like my content, I hope you'll also check out and subscribe to my primary channel, Game of Life 411. Where my goal is to help you win at the game of life, whether that means finance, family, fitness, or something else. And remember, you're in charge of your own health.